Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for joining me on part 2 of our wilderness survival episode. If you missed part 1 of the series, I will include a link in the description tab. Today, we're going to dive a little bit further into wilderness survival and talk about ways to gather food, whether that's from animals or plants, extra tools you may find useful, and a couple of ways to reduce weight on your packing list. So before we dive into the episode, I want to throw up a quick disclaimer. I am not a doctor, and I am not prescribing anything to you. If you find yourself in need of medical attention, please seek out a doctor. The views on this show are mine, and if you don't agree, I would encourage you to have a civil discussion as an adult and post reliable sources backing up your claims. Ultimately, it's my show, so I get to talk about whatever I wish, and I don't really care if it offends or bothers you. I'm here to try and encourage and educate people, not attend to your feelings. Also, I'm going to include some more links in the description that may aid you in identifying wild foods such as mushrooms, berries, and plants. However, please do your own research to verify that what you are eating is not poisonous. Remember, just because a plant is edible doesn't mean you may not experience side effects such as nausea, headache, and whatever else. Alright, so let's go ahead and get after it. You find yourself out in the wilderness. You don't have any food. What are you going to do? Well, if you recall from part 1, the rule of 3, you can survive 3 weeks without food. Obviously, there's many factors that come into play, such as temperature, body composition, how much energy you're expending on a daily basis, so on and so on. But I'm hungry and I want to find sustainment. Well, the most unpopular, but probably one of the most effective means is going to be looking on the ground or under rocks and fallen timber for, let's call them creepy crawlies. We're going to look at beetle larvae for an example. They can yield up to 155 calories per 100 grams. Most of that is coming in the form of protein and fat, which are the two most important macronutrients, and especially in a survival situation, protein and fat are going to be far more beneficial than carbohydrates. However, get whatever you can get. I would recommend doing your own research beforehand, because there are different forms of larvae, such as dragonflies, that can have risk due to, I believe it's an accumulation of mercury. So I'm not telling you to go out and eat any and all worms or beetles or whatever. Just like anything, you need to do your own research, but there are very many types of crawly critters that you can consume, and they are some of the most nutrient dense foods on our planet, believe it or not. Alright, so you can't find any crawlies. The best advice I would have is to research and keep a small copy of an edible plant guide on you during your journey. Many plants in nature are edible, and yes, many are poisonous. The most dense plant foods you're likely going to encounter in the wild are going to be nuts. I don't know every single nut that is edible, but I'm going to suggest a few common ones: hickory nuts, walnuts, hazelnut, pecan, pinyon nuts. You get the idea. If you can't find any crawlies or nuts, resort to berries. So here in Colorado, there's a few different edible berries that I know of. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. I don't have time to cover every single edible or non-edible food in nature. And then what applies to me here in Colorado would be vastly different from somebody even a state over in Kansas. So some of the edible berries that I do know of here in Colorado are going to be thimbleberries, juniper berries, choke, cherries, saskatoons, wild raspberries. You could also resort to cattails. Cattails are edible. Prickly pear cacti are edible. Just remove the prickles, the spikes off of them, and then you can eat them raw or you can cook them. Morel and porcini mushrooms, dandelions are edible. I used to make dandelion jelly and dandelion syrup, believe it or not, and the entire dandelion plant from the root to the petal is edible. However, the cup of the flower is often bitter and tart, so I would suggest not eating that. However, if you're in a survival situation, anything that you can get your hands on, sometimes you just gotta suck it up. So if you caught on, two of the most popular trees in Colorado are going to be the juniper and pinyon pine. We mentioned juniper berries and we mentioned pinyon nuts. So they both carry an edible delicacy, I guess, if you could say. So yeah, we could go on and on about what is or isn't edible, but pick up a plant guide from your local bookstore. Read through it a couple of times and carry it on you. That way, if you're unsure when you're out in the wild, you'll be able to reference that guide. If you're still not sure, it would probably be best just to avoid it. It's better safe than sorry. I mean, if you're absolutely in a dire situation, you could probably have a very small amount of a poisonous plant. I'm not advising you to, but I know some people who have ate known poisonous plants in small amounts just to get a little bit of glycogen and stuff back in their system and give them that little boost that they need. So let's go ahead and move on to meat. Contrary to popular belief, you're going to be able to eat just about any wild animal or fish. Yeah, I know there's a couple, people say you can't eat bats because they carry the most diseases out of any animal. Well, there's a lot of people that eat bats, and there's not too much wrong with them. Maybe it just has to do in the thoroughness that you cook the meat. So the easiest way that you're going to be able to gather meat is likely going to be with a firearm. If you don't have a firearm with you, I hope you brought a fishing line and fishing hooks that we included in our survival kit in part 1. And if you don't have either, you have failed to properly prepare yourself. And if you're going out with a party of people, you have failed every individual that is accompanying you, and they have failed themselves and their teammates as well. So there are some other alternative methods. Once again, I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but you could attempt to make an atlatl, which is a device for throwing a spear or a dart, and basically it's going to give you leverage to propel the dart. You're probably going to have a lot better luck setting traps, and I'm going to talk about a couple of traps real quick. The first one would be a common snare. You can make a common snare for small game out of the interior strands of the 550 cord. So the guts of the 550, if you notice on the ends, it'll have around, I don't remember exactly, I think there's maybe 6 strands inside of there. Don't shoot me if I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong, but you can use the white innard strands or the guts to make snares for small game. Once again, 550 cord was included in the survival kit that we did in part 1, so you'll see there was a reason for a lot of these things. For snaring a larger game, you're going to need to use the whole 550 cord more than likely. So you're going to want to tie off your rope or the strand to a sturdy tree or a sturdy base, and you're going to place some sticks underneath the loop. So if you have kind of like Y-shaped sticks, that you can just barely have that loop resting on there, and what you're aiming for is for that loop or that circle to be around head height of the animal, so that when an animal walks by, their head is going to get trapped in the snare, and as they pull away, it'll tighten around their neck, ultimately either trapping or potentially suffocating them. I'm all for humane dispatching of animals, whether that's domestic animals or wild animals. However, when it comes to survival, you have to do what you have to do. So, talked about a snare trap. Let's go ahead and talk about a deadfall trap. So, a deadfall trap is probably going to be the easiest trap that you can make and set. You're going to need a large rock or a log that's going to ideally be big enough to crush the skull of whatever you're trying to trap. You're going to take a branch. Pine usually works really well for this, and you're going to bend a branch into a U shape and secure it in place using a couple sticks on alternating sides of the branch. You want to tie a rope onto the end of the U-shaped branch and then attach it to some form of bait if you have or can find any, and then you'll also have another rope tied off onto a stick that is propping up the log or the rock. And so the rope from the U-shaped branch to the bait should be tight, so if something were to take the bait, it will spring that U-shaped branch back straight, causing it to pull the prop away and the object to collapse. If you do set a deadfall trap and you're approaching it, be mindful that if you did trap something under it, it may not have killed it. It may have just trapped it in place. So be prepared to strike it or do whatever you need to do. And then finally, I'm gonna talk about a funnel trap. So probably funnel traps are more common to water. You can use them in non-aquatic environments, but they're definitely going to be more successful in an aquatic environment. And so we're going to just focus on the aquatic version of a funnel trap for the sake of this discussion, So at night, fish are going to swim next to the banks. They're going to move away from deep holes into shallower water to feed, and they can often be directed into traps from which they are unlikely to escape. If you've ever seen a video of a funnel trap or a fish trap, you have one way in, and fish generally aren't going to be able to find their way back out of that for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a fish, but you're going to want to make the walls of the funnel trap with either piled up stones that are tight together so that the fish won't be able to escape, or tightly spaced sticks. And regardless of which material you use to make the trap, you're going to want to make sure that they're secure and driven solidly into the bed of the lake, pond, creek, river, whatever body of water you're placing your trap in, and only allow for a small opening. And then one of the great things about a funnel trap is if you are near a body of water which contains fish, it can provide you with a potentially long-term food source, and you can keep the fish trapped until you're ready to eat them. So it has a lot of benefits to it. And if you do trap fish in there and you can't gather them by hand, just take a stick and sharpen it as a spear, and then you can just roil the water and then stab them with the spear to pull them out of there. Whatever way you do collect your food, be sure that you're preparing it away from your shelter to try and help prevent wild game from coming into your camp. If you have a large animal, a bear will maul you, an elk could gore you, trample you, so it's best general rule of thumb to prepare your food away from your camp. And we're going to move on from the topic of food and discuss a couple useful tools that you may want to bring along. So it's necessary to have a pocket knife or a multi-tool at all times. What good is trapping or killing an animal going to be if you have no means to skin or process it? You could use a scraping tool like the indigenous people did, but you need to survive and reserve all the energy that you can. So we're trying to think of being efficient here. Bring a small, lightweight shovel. You can get collapsible shovels for fairly cheap. I usually try to avoid cheap when it comes to camping or survival tools. However, there's a couple places that I am willing to make a little bit of a sacrifice, and a shovel would be one. I recently picked up a new shovel up at Jack's in Fort Collins. They were on sale, I think, for $25. They probably weigh a couple of pounds. Um, it's not the most durable, but it's lightweight, and generally I'm only going to use it to shovel snow or pine needles or very light material, so it'll do the job that I need. Um, you could build an igloo shelter if you're in a very snowy environment. You could build an igloo, or you could shovel out snow for the base of your tent. It could also, as long as you have a durable enough material, it could serve as a frying pan, so you wouldn't have to bring a frying pan or a skillet with you. A lot of shovels have a serrated portion of it, so it could be used as a light cutting tool. You could also use it as a hammer or a weapon, or in the event that you may have to use a raft, you could also use it as an oar. The third tool we're going to talk about is going to be a hatchet or a small folding saw, and pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to make it easier to build a shelter, collect firewood, process animals, or cut down edible vegetation. So once again, guys, there are hundreds of options here. Like I said in part one, this is a multi-part episode. We don't have the time to discuss every possible option, and even if we did, what I find useful here in Colorado may not be the same for a listener in a different environment. These are just some helpful suggestions and ideas to get your brain churning. So the last thing that we're going to cover is, what do we mean when we talk about reducing our pack weight? Well, you're going to reduce the weight of your pack. So, let's look at an MRE. If you open your MRE package and you dump everything on your table, go ahead and toss out the cardboard, toss out the heater. You don't need the heater. It's a luxury, not a necessity. The food is already pre-cooked, so whatever, toss it out. Just toss out any items you don't need. Cut off excess plastic from each individual meal item in the original package. So if you'll notice on the meal items, they all have a terrible crease on there, and right above that terrible crease you can cut around that, ultimately reducing weight. And even if you're reducing a few grams off of each package, it's going to build up over time. So go ahead and fold the bag over once you've done this and stuff it inside of your dry sack. And an MRE is usually going to weigh about 1 pound 14 ounces, and after I field strip my MREs, I'm usually able to get it down to within a few grams plus or minus of 1 pound. So if I'm taking 6 MREs out with me and I save 14 ounces each, that's 5.25 pounds, I believe, that I have saved. Just over 5 pounds, let's say. So, remember, an ounce in the morning weighs a pound at night. I wouldn't suggest doing this unless you know what you're looking at and how your pack functions, but a lot of people will even cut excess off of their straps of the backpack for even further weight savings. I'm probably going to go ahead and make a quick video of how to field strip an MRE. I know it sounds like a very simple process, and it is. However, I noticed that a lot of people that do field strip their MREs are still not getting the potential weight savings that they could. And going into that field stripping, if you have items in there that aren't providing any energy to you, or they don't have, like I would keep the alcohol wipe, for sanitation reasons, whether you need to sanitize a tool or your hands or whatever. I always save the wipes and the napkins, but there's plenty, depending on what MRE you have. If you have something that's not going to provide energy or sanitation to you, just throw it out. There's convenience and delicacy isn't really a thing in survival. So if I can save a couple of ounces and I'm planning on going out for a couple of days, that couple of ounces or that extra pound, that's a big difference. So we talked about what to eat, how to hunt or trap it, some useful tools to bring along, and a couple ways to save weight. On the next part of this episode, we're going to talk about mental preparedness and what kind of mindset you need before going out in the wild, being uncomfortable, because unless you're one of those people with a rooftop tent that is camping out at their truck or pulling a camper or an RV around, you're probably going to be pretty uncomfortable, and I wouldn't really count camping in a camper or a rooftop tent attached to your vehicle wilderness survival. Not to offend anybody there, but it's not the same thing. We're also going to discuss some ways to repel insects from items that you can gather in the wild. Being from Missouri, northwest Missouri, northeast Kansas, mosquitoes are a very big deal. So there's a lot of ways that you can help keep mosquitoes and other bugs and pests, insects off of you. And the last thing you want is to contract malaria or West Nile or whatever while you're out in the wild. So I thought that would be something that probably most people don't cover on their podcast or shows about wilderness survival, so I thought that would be cool to throw in there. Anyway, that's about it from me. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed part 2 of this multi-part episode. If you did, please remember to leave a like and let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already subscribed, I hope I was able to earn your subscription today. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and remember, no cool shit ever happened with I was sitting on my couch. Get out there and enjoy life. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, God bless.